Well, the way it looks through that camera is perfect for naturalism. It's like the camera's tilted, so everything's on a slant, so it looks like this is being delivered from the Titanic. The Titanic is a perfect example of naturalism. The ship was unsinkable, so they didn't put enough lifeboats on it. They made all of the compartments watertight, but they didn't take it all the way up, so once the water came in from the top, when the iceberg hit it, it just flowed down on it. And this kind of arrogance behind it is so typically human. And the naturalists would say, of course that ship was going to sink. If we look at, let's start with King of the Bingo game. What's the situation in King of the Bingo game? We looked a little bit at it earlier. We have a black guy from the South who can't get a job. Why is he so desperate to get a job? Why does he need one so badly? He has no money. Well, why does he need money even more than most people? His wife is sick and she needs an operation. Does he deserve to have what happened to him happen to him? No, he's not a bad person. If anything, if this were a romantic story, how would this end up? He would win the jackpot, it would be enough for the operation, his wife would get better. How much is the jackpot in the bingo game? 38 or 36.96. It's under $40. Even in 1944, was there any life-saving operation you could get for $40? No. He can't, there is no possible happy ending to this story. Because you notice that he does win. It does come up on 00 at the end. Doesn't matter. Why is it 00 anyway? Why is that perfect naturalism?
Zero is synonymous, like 00 is synonymous for big loser.
Yeah, it's a double loss. Yeah. 0 is as low as you can get. And the house always wins on 00. And the house always wins for as far as naturalism is concerned. This guy's got no chance here. Biologically, his fate is determined beforehand. How? His skin color. He's born black in a racist white society in the 40s. Did he choose that? No. Was there anything he could have done about that? No. So biologically, he hasn't got a chance. Maybe he was a really bright guy. Why was it out of the question he would get a white-collar job? What was his schooling going to be like? 1940 in the South.
Very little to none.
Little to none. Even if you were white in the South, you wouldn't get all that good of an education. So his opportunities are already determined by his biology. He hasn't got any choice about that. He's doomed from day one by his biology. Well, how about his economics? He's a rich kid down on his luck? No, he's never been rich. He's always been poor. He talks about everybody knows. Well, look where do we see him? Where does the story take place? In a movie theater. It's not at the opera. He hasn't got a box there.
He doesn't have anything to eat or drink.
He hasn't got anything to eat or drink. He has, in fact, he's been at the movies. He's been there a number of days in a row, trying to win this jackpot. They can't help him anyway. So he's apparently been spending the money that he might even have used to buy that bag of peanuts, the smell of which tortures him so much. And he doesn't. He's as a romantic, he looks like a romantic hero. I mean, here's the guy who's starving himself to death, trying to get enough money to save the person that he loves. That's a setup for a romantic story. As long as he wins the jackpot in the end and she gets saved and she has the operation. But to the naturalist, there's no hope of any of that. And none of this was anything he deserved. All this is forces that he's born into. He's born into that economic situation. If he was rich, he would get the operation. But he's not. He's poor. Everybody around him is poor. How do we know this isn't one of the wealthier theaters? Do the wealthy go to the movies even in 1940 to play bingo at the intermission? No. Winning $38, they probably wouldn't even bother to pick it up. So everybody around him is poor. That's why he talks about everybody he knows, he feels like there's been this bingo wheel, handing out the unlucky numbers of their days. He didn't deserve to be born into that situation. It was just bad luck. The fact that he isn't in the South anymore makes a difference. How?
Because if he was in the South, he could ask someone, can I have something to drink or something to eat?
He says that lady, he said, I could ask that lady for peanuts and she would give them to me without even a second thought. But up here, well, how's the North different from the South in 1940? He's in a big city instead of in the country. There's that naturalistic, brutal struggle for existence going on. Everybody's looking out for themselves. Everybody there is in pretty bad shape, and they don't know. That's the other thing about the city is you don't know everybody. It turns over. When you're born in the country or a small town, you grow up with the same people. Maybe if he was still in the South, not only would somebody have given him some food, there probably would have been relatives that might have been able to help him out. Even though everybody he knows is poor, maybe they would have gotten together and each gave some little bit that all together they might have gotten an operation for Laura. If it was a romantic story, that's how it would turn out. But there's no hope of that. Everybody in the story, are there any admirable characters anywhere in that story? No, there's nobody to look up to. The people in the audience aren't particularly nice. Are they sympathetic to him? No. When he's running around and won't let go of that thing, everybody's telling him, bingo, you jerk. Get down off the stage, give somebody else a chance. And he thinks that they're all fools because they don't understand the power that he has. The power is an illusion. But it doesn't matter. This is another way that he's typically human. How many of you have ever bought a lottery ticket? During the time you had that lottery ticket, from the time you bought it up until they had the drawing, what did you do? Just forgot about it?
Kept an eye on it.
Kept an eye on it. What did you think about in terms of that ticket? What, that you were going to win and all the stuff you were going to do with it when you won. $20 million, all the stuff you'd buy, all of the people you'd help out with it, all the great stuff you could do. So for 3 or 4 days, you got to be a millionaire. A mental man. The money just hadn't come yet, but it was coming. As long as you had that ticket, that's why. Who buys more lottery tickets? The rich or the poor? The poor by a wide, wide margin. How come? One, they need the money. Secondly, there's no way that they can see ever getting that money through any efforts of their own. It's just not going to happen. So the only way your life is going to change radically is if you win the lottery. Now you know that the odds in the lottery, the odds of winning the lottery are the same as being struck by lightning 11 consecutive times. But it doesn't matter. Somebody wins. And until those numbers are drawn, it's you. Everybody gets to have hope. That's what the lottery ticket is. That's why he plays the bingo game. There's really no possible outcome that will save him. Just like it's incredibly unlikely that you would actually win the lottery, but it doesn't matter. For a brief period of time, you get to be a millionaire. You get to believe that that's going to happen. Well, what's that got to do with him holding on to that button? That's his hope. Until when that thing stops, no matter what number it stops on, two things happen. Either he loses and Laura dies, or he wins and Laura dies. But as long as he hasn't let go of that button, he can imagine that there's some hope that he's going to be able to save her. That there is some possible happy ending to this. It's only when he lets go of that button. That's why he can't let it go. Why he has to run back and forth. His dream is a naturalistic dream. The dream he has from the time he's a little kid. He's on a railroad track, and the train is behind him, and it's going to run him down, and he jumps off the track and keeps running, and what happens? The train jumps off the track and comes after him. Well, what's that got to do with his life?
And no matter what he does, it's going to catch up with him.
He's going to get run over by that big impersonal train. That's the forces that are already bearing down on his life. Right from the beginning, he was destined to get run down by the train. There was no way he was going to have a happy ever after, the naturalists will tell you. Not only because nobody has a happy ever after, but because the train was always bearing down on him. The whole of society, the laws were set up against him. The economics were set up against him. And some of this stuff was set up against him hundreds of years ago, before he was ever born. Christopher Columbus is partly responsible for his dilemma. Columbus doesn't discover the New World. You don't need low-priced labor. Now, did slavery just start in the 1500s? No, the entire ancient world ran on slave labor. Almost every culture up until now has run on slave labor. It only happens to impinge on him because Columbus discovers America, and you need a whole lot of labor to develop it, and so slavery starts to become a real profitable thing again, which hadn't been for a brief time, for a while.
I was reading something too, like it was a different kind of slavery, but eventually you could buy your own freedom, you could get a little bit more freedom, at least in ancient Greece.
In Greece and Rome, sometimes you could buy your way out, although you could actually buy your way out even of American slavery, if you had an owner who wanted to sell, and if you had an owner who didn't claim all of your labors. In other words, if you had somebody who said, okay, when I want you to do this, you have to do it, but the rest of the time is your own, and you whittled things and sold them and saved up the money, you could sometimes buy your freedom. It was a little bit different in that a lot of times people were slaves all through the Middle Ages. When an army came and took over a town, the women and the children and all the men who weren't warriors were all sold into slavery. That was how the army paid themselves. You got a certain number of captives, and you did whatever you wanted with them. So it was different in that respect. It wasn't as, in a way, it wasn't as demeaning in the ancient world. I mean, if you weren't a citizen in Greece, you weren't worth anything. But it still wasn't as humiliating as 19th century slavery was. But all of that stuff is part of a long process that doomed him going back hundreds of years. Forces that he didn't even know existed. I mean, he does have an inkling that it existed. He forgets his name. And he says it was a name that was given to his family by a white slave owner. And he still feels it's a bad thing to lose your name, even if it's a name that somebody else gave you. But right from the beginning, it shows how little control he has over his life. His name isn't even his own. Nothing he has is really his own. So again, he's doomed right from the beginning of the story. Economics dooms him. The culture dooms him. The geography dooms him. The fact that he's come north is part of his doom. What happens to him at the end of the story? Beside the fact that he wins and it isn't a win.
He gets dragged off. They take him away.
Actually, I think they kill him.
They kill him.
Yeah, they hit. Well, all we know, they do haul him off. They finally tackle him. He's running around and evading him, and the cops jump on him and tackle him. And first of all, he's in deep trouble already, even before the cops get there. How do we know? His nose has started to bleed. So he's starting to have hemorrhages sometimes, probably from the stress, from the hopelessness of his situation. And in the very end,
It says he felt a dull pain exploding in his skull.
and he knew, even as it's, earlier when he talks about the blood, it's compared to baseball seams of blood like a head that's beaten by policemen. So he's getting hit. You hit somebody in the head with a club, you probably kill him. As he warmed in the justice of the man's tight smile, he did not see the man's slow wink, nor see the bow-legged man behind him step clear of the swiftly descending curtains and set himself for a blow. He only felt the dull pain exploding in his skull, and he knew, even as it slipped out of him, that his luck had run out on stage. So it's not a certainty that he gets killed, but it's pretty likely. It's a head beaten in by police. Did that happen in 1940? Happened to poor people all the time, and happened to poor black people a lot oftener than it happened to poor white people. Is it because he or they deserved it? No, it's because of the whole structure of society. Who got picked to be police in 1940? Did you need a college degree of any sort? No, basically you needed to be tall and strong and pretty mean. That's what they picked you for being tough. And if your success in life depends on being strong and tough and mean, what kind of policeman are you going to be?
Not really thinking before you're acting.
You're not going to be, most of your success is going to come from cracking heads. 1940s, people accepted what's today considered brutality was just doing business. It was just the way things were done. Police, if you were somebody who wasn't in the middle class, the police were expected to rough you up. If you were poor, the police were expected to rough you up. It was assumed that you were going to steal stuff sooner or later, unless somebody beat you and drove you out of town. That was basically what their job was. So again, you notice that the guy who hits him isn't played up as a villain. We don't even know anything about him. Society's already determined that that's going to happen. He has no chance of coming out of this. And again, it's not good and evil never enters into it. There's no chance that he's going to win. He's going to be destroyed. Anybody have any questions or comments on King of the Bingo game? To build a fire. What's the problem in to build a fire?
The guy's arrogant.
The guy is arrogant. Actually, the real problem is, could this story work if the main character were a woman? No. No woman would go out in 135 degrees below zero. I don't think there's a woman that dumb in the entire world. This guy is doomed to go out into it, though, because he's a guy. Why? 19th century. What was a man supposed to be like?
Tough and thoroughly, and a man, working with his hands, getting all sweaty.
Supposed to be a manly man.
Yeah.
You notice that he talks about gender a lot in this. The old-timer who's survived being out in below zero. The one who warns him that below 50 degrees below zero, you got to go with a partner. The first time he survives, he says, "Oh, they're so womanish, these old men. Any man who was a man could go alone." In fact, what does his being male have to do with him being in Alaska to begin with? What's he there for? It's the Yukon. You've heard of the Yukon, the gold rush? He's up there looking for gold.
I'm just going to say he's searching for his fortune.
He's searching for his fortune. Well, why is that a particularly male thing in the 19th century?
So this is their job to find a fortune themselves, something better than they want.
Yeah, that's what men were supposed to do. Men were supposed to go out and get the money, and then women would marry them. You want to breed, you have to have money. There are no women going off to the gold rush. I'll take that back. There are hookers going off to the gold rush. They're probably the only people who really made any money out of it. Those are the people who sold shovels. But there aren't any women going up mining for gold. How come? It's not done in those days. Women got married and had children. It wouldn't have entered their mind to go off to the gold rush. And if it had, any woman who showed up in the Yukon, what would everybody would have assumed? They would assume that she was a hooker. So no matter what happened, no matter how virtuous she wasn't going up there for gold. If she did go up there for gold, everybody would have treated her like she wasn't going up there for gold anyway. The time determined who was going to go. They were determined that this guy would go. How did economics determine it?
Ones who were poor were going up there more because they wanted to find a big fortune.
Yeah, everybody wanted to. Jack London went to the gold rush. He and his stepfather, they borrowed money to get a start to even go up there. And then when they got up there, the stepfather got sick and had to come back, and Jack went on by himself. He never got anywhere near striking gold, although he made more of a fortune out of the Yukon than most of the people who went up there, because that was the basis for a whole lot of his stories. Rich people didn't go to the Yukon. They didn't need to go to the Yukon. They already had their money. Probably the only rich guy, why would any rich guy have gone to the Yukon, assuming one went? Probably the only reason would have been to prove that he was a man. He'd inherited the money. Sometimes when you inherit money, you don't feel like it's yours and it doesn't give you enough personal worth, so you got to prove yourself. Maybe there was one or two rich guys up there proving that they were men. They might go up there to start businesses, but they wouldn't have been going up there. Now, he's looking for a business on the way. He's looking for somehow to make money. They're up there as gold miners, but the guys that he's meeting, he's come a long way around looking to see if they could move lumber down the river once it gets to be spring. So he's a guy looking for the main chance. He's looking for some way to get rich. Ideally, it's going to be the gold, but if it isn't that, there's going to be something else up there. And it's economics that determines that. If he was already rich, he wouldn't be looking for those opportunities. In fact, he wouldn't have been going to meet his friends, because he would have already been with his friends. He only came the long way around, seeing if there was some other opportunity they might have that they might be able to make money on. And that's determined by economics. It wasn't a choice that he made. How about his age? How does that kill him? Well, you notice the old guy is not out there freezing to death. How come?
Not as naive.
He's not as naive. Once you get to a certain age, you get to recognize your abilities. You've failed and gotten lumps so often that you pretty much know what things you can do and what things you can't do. And you don't push it. You don't have the energy. If you put an old guy and a young guy out in the middle of, 130 degrees below freezing, who would you bet on coming back in alive? all things being equal. Got an old guy and a young guy, stick them out naked in a snowbank. Who do you figure is probably coming back? It ain't the old guy. He's much more likely to die. It's harder just staying alive when you get old. When you're young, you're more naive. He doesn't really understand what 107 degrees or whatever it is below freezing really means. Notice he's continually startled by how cold it is. Takes off his gloves and almost immediately his hands start to freeze. And he's shocked. In fact, one of the very first things that we see that shows you, one of the things that shows you that he's a primitive character. He chews tobacco. What's the problem with him chewing tobacco in this weather? He can't spit. So he's got this amber, this yellowish set of icicles of drool, tobacco drool hanging down. So like, is this the most sophisticated guy that you're going to find? No, it shows you he's a primitive right off the bat. He's amazed that when he spits, it freezes in midair. He's been out in 50 degrees below zero twice before. Once 50 and once 55, and he didn't die. Well, how does that make it certain that he is going to die? Yeah, it's 20-some degrees colder than that. It's a lot colder than that. And the fact that he thinks that he could do it at one temperature without much difficulty makes him think he can do it at the other. When we look at him, is he an intellectual or is he a man of action? Man of action. He's not a guy who does a lot of thinking. And we know that. First of all, the narrator tells us that his big problem is he had no imagination. Why is that a problem?
Couldn't imagine the worst possible situation.
Couldn't imagine the worst possible situation. We just say to him, it's 100 and some degrees below freezing. He can't really picture that. All he can picture is it's cold. The reality, that's why the reality of it stuns him. He can't imagine what that kind of cold really is. He also can't imagine the worst thing that can happen to him. This is not uncommon when you're young, especially if you're young and male. Again, it's called infantile omnipotence. Can't happen to me. It's the same thing we saw in the hills like white elephants. Other people might freeze to death, but it couldn't happen to him. He's young and strong. Young, strong people don't die. He can't imagine himself dying. He can't imagine himself in any situation that he can't get himself out of. And he's got proof of it. He went out in 50 degrees and he didn't have a problem. He went out in 55, he didn't have a problem. Why should this be any different? It's just colder. So he can't really foresee what's going to happen to him. How good is he at planning? Ms. Dunphy?
I was going to say something all because he was fire. He ran under the tree with a big old patch of snow and he puts fire out and he falls on fire. He doesn't think very much ahead.
Yeah, he didn't plan that out. After the snow falls and puts out his fire and his last hope, he says, oh, I should have built it in the open. And the only reason he built it there was because it was easy to get the branches and pull them right down and drop them. It wasn't anything that he had any foresight about. Yes, ma'am.
He was also wishing that he would have bought that strap for his face that would have kept his face warm.
And it's pretty early on that he starts to feel his nose getting frostbitten and his cheeks. And you notice that he isn't very far at that point. He doesn't turn around and go back and or stop and make himself a strap out of birch bark or out of a leather, or cut something out of his the parka that he's wearing. He just goes on without it. What's the only preparation he's made for this trip? He's got lunch. He's got one sandwich in close to his body so the biscuits don't freeze. It's been dipped in bacon grease and it's got a slab of bacon on it. That's his whole planning. He's going out into this sub-zero weather, and he's got but I got a sandwich. It's not really a problem. No grasp whatsoever of the kind of thing that he's going to face. Well, why is that? What's his being male got to do with that?
He's already sure he can handle anything that'll happen.
Yeah, he's a guy. He can handle anything. He's so sure he doesn't need to plan. He's a strong, healthy guy, and he always comes out on top. He's invincible. He can't be beaten. He can't be harmed. He can't imagine that could happen to him. So he doesn't need to plan. The kind of guy who goes to Alaska anyway. Are they big on planning? What are the odds of you going 1,500 miles or more into an incredibly difficult climate and picking gold up off the ground and becoming rich? You might as well stay home and buy lottery tickets. Anybody who does any thinking would think going to the gold rush is not a way to get rich. Going to the Yukon and selling shovels, that's a way to get rich. You're going to find gold. So you can't be a guy who thinks. Most of the guys up there, and they're all guys, are not guys who thought ahead. They're people who got this idea. That's why it was a gold rush. Everybody heard gold was discovered, and they all went off to go and find it. They have this unreal... Is that true of men in general? Sadly, I think it is. Guys tend to have an idealized version of themselves, even now, as the hero. We generally figure we can't be beaten. And if you're young, you're going to live forever. You're going to live forever, and you're basically invulnerable. And it's not until you get into your late 20s, early 30s, and you're a half step slower that even becomes a possibility to you. That you're not always going to be able to dominate the world just by your sheer physical presence. Our culture doesn't encourage guys to do a lot of thinking, still. And in the 19th century, it didn't encourage them really at all. The admirable man wasn't the scholar. It was the man of action. It was the guy who went out and did things. It's really to his detriment that he manages to make the fire the first time. And you notice he succeeds at it the first time. First of all, he avoids the dangers more than once. He knows there are some of the hot springs that don't freeze. The water goes underneath the snow. You can't see them until you're right on top of them. But you know they're there because there's a kind of candied appearance to the snow. Once he almost steps in it, he comes around that bend and he has to jerk to the side. He realizes he almost stepped into it. What does he do? Before that, how about his relationship with the dog? Is this his friend and his companion? Stanford?
It's like his test dummy for there's something like St. Jersey that says pushes the dog to do it first, and the dog's just like another tool.
It's just another tool to him. It's another thing. And he sacrifices it all the time. This were a romantic story, what would happen with the dog? The dog would if he froze, the dog would stay there loyal to the end and freeze to death with him. And they would find them with the dog still keeping guard, frozen to death, over his frozen body. Or the dog would drag him to his friends all the way to the camp, and even though he would lose a limb or two, the dog would save him. And in a really romantic story, the dog would drag him into camp with his last breath and die. And then we would all cry because the dog died. You don't see that loving relationship in this story. What's his last backup fail-safe plan to get his hands warm? Kill it and stick his hands inside it and warm up with the warmth of its body so that he can start the fire. And what keeps him from doing that? Because he has an attack of conscience at the last moment? His hands don't work and he can't get the knife out. He grabs the dog. First of all, he's calling the, come here, doggy, doggy. Why doesn't the dog come? He never talks that way. He whips the dog and he abuses it all the time. And he has a voice of command. And the dog's going, I don't know what's going on here, but there's something wrong. And then when he commands the dog to come, it comes and he jumps on it and grabs it, and then he realizes that there's nothing he can do. He can't kill it. And so he lets it go. Not because he's kind-hearted, but because he can't carry out his plan. Why does the dog hang around? Because it loves him? Why?
Wants to get warm.
He wants to get warm. The guy makes fire. He's got thumbs. That's why most of your pets love you. You have thumbs. You know how to work the can opener. You're worth hanging around. What happens when the dog realizes he's dead and he's not going to make a fire? Goes off looking for more fire makers. There's a lot of these thumbed creatures. They make fire, so he's going to go find another one. There's no loyalty there. How about the dog's response to the weather? Does this thing, is it leaping around going, we're going to go play in the snow? No, the dog is looking at him right in the beginning like, are you crazy? What are we doing out here? It's cold. It's time to curl up and put our tail over our nose. What is wrong with it? Well, he makes fire. I'll go with him, but the dog doesn't want, the dog has enough sense not to be out in that weather. But the man doesn't have enough sense. And the reason he doesn't have enough sense isn't because he isn't more intelligent than the dog. It's because there are all of these enormous forces making him go out there, keeping him from seeing the dangers. The economic, the biological. Even the fact that he's an American works against him. Why? 19th century American, well even now, are we considered the most sophisticated culture in the world? No. We don't have a huge emphasis on the intellect in our culture. We never did have. How about adventurous, though? Are we thought of as adventurous by the rest of the world? Yeah, the only ones more adventurous than us are the Australians. But Americans, you'd expect Americans to go off to the Yukon. So if he were British, he would be more reserved. He probably wouldn't be up there in the first place. And if he was, he would probably have done a lot more thinking about what he was going to do. Could he turn back at any time? Yeah, until he gets halfway there. There's no reason why he can't just go back. He figures out pretty early that that this is dangerous, that it really is cold. I mean, his hands start to freeze the minute he takes the mittens off, and after a while, even when he bangs them on his legs, he still can't get them warm again. You would think at that point you would have said, my hands aren't working. It's 3 miles back. It's another 15 miles to the camp. So what's the sensible thing to do? Go back. How come he doesn't? He'd have to admit defeat. He's got to go back to that old guy and go, you know, you were right. I'm not man enough to be out there at 107 degrees below freezing. Can he do that? No. In fact, if you said to him, well, you can freeze to death as a manly man, or go back and admit that you're not one, what would he have chosen? Up until the freezing actually starts, he probably would have chosen freezing. He can't go back. And then, of course, the more success that he has against the elements, the more certain he is to eventually be defeated by them. The fact that he gets that first fire started makes him confident now that he can start a fire in that weather. So he's sure that he can make it. When the dog falls through the ice, what does the dog do immediately? Starts to lick the ice off and chew it out from in between his toes. And the guy comes and helps him with that at least. The dog knows you got to respond instantly. But he keeps delaying. Can't get things going. He keeps trying different solutions. And of course, the longer he goes, the more danger he's in. He even realizes that he really should have had a partner. After he can't kill the dog, what does he do to try to save himself? He can't build a fire. The matches are gone. The last fire went out. He can't kill the dog. He tries to run. What's the problem? It's too far and he's too cold. His feet are frozen. He can't feel them. And he hasn't got the stamina to run all the way there anyway. And he falls down. And then he gets up and decides that he'll walk. But when he starts to walk, he realizes he's not going to make it. So he tries to run again. Notice he panics. He becomes, again, he goes back to primitive, natural man. When you put the capacities of human beings up against the forces of nature, who's going to win every time? Nature is. This guy's a dead man from the beginning of the story. It's just a matter of it working itself out. If he had been a puny, scrawny guy who got tuberculosis early in life and coughed a lot, would he have been there? No. The very fact that he was a strong, healthy man dooms him to end up in that situation. The fact that he's a man dooms him to be there. The fact that he isn't rich dooms him to be there. Does he know any of that? No. These forces are rolling over him and crushing him, and he hasn't even got a clue that they're there. He doesn't even, not only doesn't know how they work on him, he doesn't even know how they work. And of course, at the end of the story, he ends up dead. Are we surprised? No. Only if you were... Now, this did come as a shock when he wrote this. I think, was it 1886 or something? No, 1908. A little bit later. Most of the stories were romantic stories. Romantic story, somehow he would have been saved from this. People were shocked when he dies at the end because they weren't used to naturalism yet. Now, it's guys in the first two stories. Is it only guys that have all of these forces grinding them up? No. Look at the necklace. The necklace, she's as doomed as the guy in to build a fire. What dooms her? She wants to live better, and she thinks she ought to live better. Well, what is it that she's born with that gives her that idea? She's beautiful. 19th century beauty was, for a woman, was the greatest gift you could possibly have. How many women would have traded great beauty for great intelligence? Yeah, next to none. That wasn't what men were looking for. 19th century, get married. It's bad enough that she's born beautiful, but she's born beautiful into a family of clerks. French clerks. Clerks in the French bureaucracy. You don't get much more uptight than that. That's as middle class. I mean, that's where the idea of the bourgeoisie comes from. She's as middle class as you can possibly get. In fact, that's what dooms her. Economics as much as her biology. If she had been born beautiful and wealthy, what kind of life would she have had? The life that she wanted. Some handsome, rich man would have fallen in love with her and married her, and they would have lived happily ever after. To some extent, she's a victim of romanticism too. If she had been born poor, could her beauty have helped her at all? Yes, she might still have gotten out of the middle, out of the poor class by being a prostitute. And maybe, since she was so good looking, one of her Johns would have been a rich guy, would have fallen in love with her and forgotten about how she had earned her living, and maybe, if not married her, at least set her up. She could have worked her way from guy to guy, accumulating a fortune. Did that happen in the real world? Absolutely. Zsa Zsa Gabor get as rich as she got by intelligence? I don't think so. She kept marrying rich guys. And she didn't have very much money when she started. But her mother knew, if you get a rich guy, you divorce him, get another rich guy, you get to keep most of the money. What keeps Mathilde from doing that? Why does the fact that she's a clerk keep her from using her body to move up in the world? What are clerks like? Are they rebels? They're conservative. They follow the rules. You can't stay in the bureaucracy, especially the 19th century French bureaucracy, unless you're very, very proper. If there's any kind of scandal and you're a clerk, you get fired. Is clerk a high-paying job? No. It's the bottom of the white-collar class. These are people who desperately want to cling to that bottom rung of the white-collar ladder. If you lose your job as a clerk, you end up on the streets. You end up in the working class. Did the clerks see themselves as better than the working class? Yes, they thought they were morally and intellectually and in just about every other way superior to people that worked with their hands. That's why they're the petty bourgeoisie, the little bourgeois, the little middle class. They don't really have enough money to try to be like the rich, but they try to be like them anyway. These are the people who follow the rules all the time. The poor don't follow the rules. Why not? Well, you'd have to be an idiot to follow the rules. Are the rules made for the poor? No, they're made for the rich. To the extent that you follow the rules, you're going to end up getting crushed. They break the rules out of desperation. Do the rich follow the rules? Not for the most part. They don't have to. They're immune to the consequences. It's the middle class that follows them. It's the middle class that's the background, especially of French society. So it would never occur to Mathilde to use her body and her beauty to move up in the world, to get herself that kind of husband. What's the odds on her bumping into any rich guy anyway, being born into a family of clerks? Who will she meet? Middle class guys, other clerks. That's why she's married to a little clerk. Why not just say she's married to a clerk? Why a little clerk? He's not even important among clerks. She's got one of the worst marriages. And remember, marriage was everything for a woman. The marriage that you made determined how your life was going to come out. And you know, she didn't pick this guy. She let herself be married to a little clerk. What was pushing her to get married? Her family. Her family wanted her married. That's what you're supposed to do. Marry off your daughters. Marry them off to somebody who could support them. You want to try to make as good a marriage as you can. But because she's beautiful, she thinks she ought to have that life of the rich. And of course that's compounded. You notice she's got a rich friend, Madame Forestier. Where did they meet? Convent school. See, it couldn't have just been private school because Mathilde would never have gotten there. She was educated by the nuns, and they were pretty strict, and so it's not unlikely that she would have mixed with another class, because generally the chances on her being friends with Madame Forestier without having met when they were young are just about zero. What about her husband? Now we know he's a little clerk. Is he a bad guy? No. In fact, he's a good guy. How do we know?
He gives up what he wants to give her what she wants.
He was saving money to buy the gun. And he wanted to go shooting with his friends. He was looking forward to a summer vacation, and he gave it up so that she could have the dress. He gets her the ticket to the ball. He thinks he's doing a great thing. She never gets to go out. She admires all of these people. And he says, they didn't give many tickets to clerks. So he had to pull a lot of strings and do a lot to get her this ticket. Is she happy with it? How come? She didn't have anything to wear. It just brought home to her even more the fact that she's got this nowhere life when she thinks she should have had a wonderful life. And again, she thinks she should have that life because, how come he doesn't think he should have a wonderful life?
He's happy where he's at.
He's happy where he's at. He's a guy. This is as good as it's probably going to get for him, and he knows that. He's going to work in the ministry, and eventually he'll retire from the ministry. And he'll save up along the way, and he'll buy a gun, and he'll go shooting, and he'll have a little bit of leisure time, but he's never going to get rich. Nobody he knows has ever gotten rich. You don't climb up the bureaucracy and become one of the great secretaries. Those people feed in from the top. They feed in from the universities, and they feed in from the great families. They don't start out from a family of clerks and move up. Notice again how gender determines what's going to happen. She's got a gift that should transcend class, her beauty, or she thinks it should. He hasn't got any gifts like that. So he's pretty realistic. He sees the way life is probably going to be for him, and that's perfectly okay. Did he expect to get a wife as good looking as Mathilde? No. I mean, this guy's just been dead lucky. That's one of the reasons why he tries to please her so much. I mean, boy, somebody else should have gotten somebody who looks like her. So he feels pretty lucky that he has her. And he's a nice guy. Romantic story. What would happen in this story?
They would have both became rich.
They would have become rich, and they'd have lived happily ever after. They'd have gone to the ball. Everybody would have admired her. They would have promoted her husband because of her. Eventually, he'd have gotten wealthy, and they would have lived happily ever after. They would never have lost the necklace. Or if they had lost the necklace, they would have been honest about it. What keeps them from doing that? Why don't they just go to Madame Forestier and say, hey, look, we lost the necklace. We got no money here. You were an idiot to lend it to us in the first place. We're sorry.
It makes them look low class.
Makes them look low class. They don't want to look like they can't afford to replace it. They don't want to look like they're irresponsible. One of the things about being middle class and a bureaucrat is that you're a responsible person. They'd have to go and admit that they weren't. If they were poor, what would they have done about losing the necklace?
Try to steal another one.
Try to steal another one just like it. That's a good idea. Yeah, maybe that probably would have been one of the alternatives. And the other would have been, look, we can't pay for this. There's no way. You shouldn't have lent it to us in the first. We feel really bad we lost your necklace, but us paying for it, it's not going to happen. Because they're used to defeats. They're used to humiliations. But the middle-class clerks, they're not. They'd have to give up their illusions of being genteel to admit they lost that necklace. Now, what happens to Mathilde when after they've lost the necklace and they got to start taking out these loans and stuff?
She grows old.
She grows old. She becomes a woman of the people. Her hands get rough. What happens to her beauty? Fades from hard work and from stress. She has to do the housework now. They dismiss the maid. They move to a garret. She carries the slops down to the street. That's not just the garbage. They had, what do they call them? Not like, they're like bedpans. She has to take them and dump them every day. She bargains. She fights for her money, sou by sou. She becomes loud. She becomes aggressive. She's nothing like what she was in the beginning of the story. Is it a happy ending that she becomes a strong and independent person? No. If it was a romantic story, this could be a romantic story even the way it ends up, if the writer had said, well, before she was very superficial and she was vain, and now she's a strong, independent person. That could have been a happy ending or a romantic story. But instead, she's destroyed. And how does the naturalist emphasize this destruction? What's the last thing we find out? The necklace wasn't real. It was made out of paste. All of this sacrifice has been for nothing. Now, you might think, well, at least we ought to admire them because they destroyed their lives to do the honorable thing, to replace the necklace that they had lost. Would a naturalist say they deserve any credit for that? No. They had no choice about that. The fact that they were middle class meant that they couldn't even have conceived of ducking out from that responsibility. They don't deserve any praise. Their actions were determined by their class and by their times, not by their own personal decisions. They had no more choice about paying off that necklace than that football player had about jumping in the river. It wasn't their heroism. It was their doom.
Will realism say that she should have been satisfied with what she had, and because she didn't accept it, she got destroyed?
No, actually, romanticism would have said that. You could have a romantic story where she gets her comeuppance. She's vain and she's arrogant and she gets humbled. And so that could be a romantic story. All a realist would say is, this is the way these people would act. If you had middle-class people in those circumstances, this is what they do. And what makes it naturalism is that we find out it was made out of paste. In other words, in a realistic story, they lose the necklace, they put their life into hawk, they pay for it, end of story. And the realist would say, well, and the truth of it is that when you read this, you'd say, yeah, that's what a middle-class French bureaucrat would do. In fact, he'd probably lose his job if they admitted to having lost that necklace. His bosses would want to know why a guy would get himself into that situation. I mean, this is a prudent, we want a prudent employee. That wasn't a very prudent thing to do. This is not a guy that can be trusted, so he could probably have lost his job if they had admitted that. It gets to be naturalism when it turns out that none of that effort was worthwhile or necessary at all. You notice Madame Forestier at the end of the story. What's she look like?
She's still beautiful.
Yeah, she's still pretty. She looks good. Why? Better genes? She hasn't had the hard work. She's still rich. Still rich, still good looking. The very fact that she's middle class dooms him into this. Would Madame Forestier have gotten into that situation? No, she knows a paste necklace from a real one. That's why, you notice that when Mathilde, most of the jewels aren't good enough for her. Don't you have more? And then she brings them out and they're diamonds. And she asks for them and Madame Forestier doesn't even hesitate. Why, of course you can have that one. Why? It's paste. It's only worth 500 francs. Madame Forestier, why doesn't Madame Forestier say, well, you can have those, dear, but you know they're paste? Why didn't she tell her that right from the beginning? One, she would have had to risk her real stuff. The rich aren't dumb. The rich stay rich because they know how to keep hold of their wealth. She's kind of relieved that all Mathilde wants is those paste ones. And she's also, her class determines her response too. If she tells Mathilde that these are paste, how is Mathilde going to feel that she didn't know real diamonds? She's going to be embarrassed. Well, Madame Forestier is well bred. You don't humiliate your friends. You don't embarrass them. Okay, they don't know what the diamonds are. You don't go, that's the wrong fork, idiot. So she does the thing that her breeding requires her to do. She's not trying to trick her. And it's not because Madame Forestier is a good or a bad person. Naturalist says her responses are as determined by her class and her economic status and by her biology as Mathilde's are. They're all doomed by these forces that they have that are beyond their control or comprehension. We leave at 4:30, right? Oh, okay, so we're done. We'll finish up this next story, and then we're doing magical realism on Thursday, so make sure you've read those 3 stories.